Chapter 1. A Quiet Practice in Millbrook. Connor McMasters ran through autumn like a man who had forgotten what seasons meant. His feet hit the pavement in steady rhythm, thud, 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 a metronome of normalcy. Maple leaves crunched beneath his sneakers, releasing that particular New England smell of decay and wood smoke that people paid good money to experience. October, in Vermont. Picture perfect. Exactly the kind of place a sensible family doctor would choose for his morning constitutional. He waved at Mr. Peterson, wrestling with a recalcitrant lawnmower in his driveway. "Might want to check the spark plug," Connor called out, not breaking stride. "Will do, Doc. Thanks." Of course Connor knew about the spark plug. He'd been watching Mr. Peterson struggle with that same mower for 3 weeks, procrastinating the obvious fix with increasingly creative temporary solutions. It was almost endearing, this human commitment to making simple problems complicated. Connor's internal monologue, the one he conducted in a dead language no one living could understand, whispered, "Ta se chom red nach feidir leat ea feitiail." He's so bored, he's timing spark plugs. 3 houses down, Mrs. Chen sat on her porch swing with a paperback and a cup of coffee that sent steam curling into the cool morning air. Connor slowed to a jog. "Morning, Mrs. Chen. Don't forget to take your blood pressure medication." She glanced up from her book, one of those beach reads with an embossed cover, and smiled. "Already took it with breakfast, Doctor. You worry too much." "That's my job." Connor gave her a thumbs up and resumed his pace. He'd seen Mrs. Chen's last blood pressure, reading 2 weeks ago. 118/76. Perfect. She was doing fine, but Dr. Connor McMasters was nothing if not attentive to his patients. Dr. Connor McMasters was a fucking fraud. Not about the medicine. He was genuinely excellent at medicine. Centuries of practice tended to make one proficient. He'd been a healer before Pasteur discovered germ theory, performed surgeries before anesthesia was invented, and learned the fundamentals of cardiology before anyone knew hearts did more than make poetic metaphors possible. No, the fraud wasn't his medical competence. It was everything else. The friendly doctor act, the jogging routine, the carefully maintained appearance of a man in his early 40s who happened to be naturally fit, naturally healthy, naturally blessed with that distinguished grey at his temples that made patients trust him. All of it, performance. Theatre. A 400-year-old immortal necromancer playing the role of small-town doctor. Population 8,000 now with free parking downtown. The Johnsons' golden retriever bounded across their lawn as Connor approached, tail wagging with the single-minded enthusiasm only dogs and toddlers could achieve. Connor stopped, crouched, let the dog. Murphy, named after some dead relative the Johnsons never stopped talking about, lick his face and lean against him with full body trust. "Hey, buddy," Connor murmured, scratching behind Murphy's ears exactly where dogs had loved being scratched since he first encountered them in medieval Ireland. "Good boy. Yes, you are. Best boy." Murphy's tail created small tornadoes in the fallen leaves. Mrs. Johnson appeared on the porch, dish towel in hand. "Sorry, Doctor. Murphy, come here. Leave Dr. McMasters alone." "He's fine," Connor said, giving Murphy one last scratch before straightening. "Beautiful morning for it." "Gorgeous. You training for something?" Connor smiled the smile he'd perfected over centuries. Warm, slightly self-deprecating, utterly believable. "Just trying to stay ahead of middle age, Mrs. Johnson." She laughed. "If you figure out how, write me a prescription." Connor jogged away, leaving Mrs. Johnson and her 57-year-old knees behind. His own knees were ancient and felt approximately 25. One of the few perks of accidentally making yourself immortal while trying to save your dying mentor from a witch hunter's blade. Pro tip for aspiring necromancers. Be very specific with your wording when you're bargaining with death. "Let her live instead of me" sounds noble right up until death decides to interpret instead as in addition to. Now Connor got to live forever while everyone he'd ever cared about aged and died and turned to dust. Fantastic. His route took him down Maple Street. Of course it was called Maple Street. This was Vermont. There were 17 Maple Streets in a 20-mile radius. Past the elementary school, where children's voices rose in that particular chaos that meant recess had just started. Past the library, with its bronze plaque commemorating some historically significant person Connor had actually met in 1842 and found profoundly boring. Past the coffee shop that would open in 45 minutes and the bookstore that wouldn't open until 10. and the hardware store whose owner Connor had once watched try to fix a leaking pipe by hitting it with a wrench until the whole pipe burst and flooded the basement. Millbrook, Vermont. Population 8,247 and holding steady. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and newcomers took a decade to stop being new. And the most exciting thing to happen in recent memory was when the high school football team made it to regionals in 2019. Connor had been here 15 years. That was the trick, really. Stay long enough to become trusted. Not so long that people started asking why you looked exactly the same as you did when you arrived. 15 years was the sweet spot. Old enough to be established, young enough that aging hadn't become conspicuous. He'd give it another 5, maybe 10 if he was careful, before he'd need to fake a career opportunity somewhere else and vanish into a new identity. Again, for the 43rd time since 1625. Beata Dryoshta, he thought bitterly. The glamorous life of a necromancer. Connor's farmhouse appeared at the end of the street, technically outside town limits, technically isolated enough that neighbours couldn't see what he did in his basement, technically perfect for someone who needed privacy and a good cover story. He'd bought it 12 years ago, 3 years after establishing his practice in Millbrook proper, and the locals had approved. Dr. McMasters is putting down roots, they'd said with satisfaction, as if purchasing real estate was some kind of blood oath to the community. He slowed to a walk as he approached, breathing only slightly elevated. His body barely registered 5 miles anymore. Once, in 1847, he'd run 37 miles straight to escape an angry mob who'd correctly identified him as something unnatural. 5 miles through autumn postcard Vermont was nothing. His phone buzzed in the pocket of his running shorts. Connor pulled it out, squinting at the screen in the morning sun. "Morning, Doc," Mrs. Patterson called. "Wants to move her appointment to Thursday. Mr. Chen needs a prescription refill." And someone named Ian Martin called about doing a wellness consultation. Not sure what that means, but he's very insistent. Left 3 messages. Jennifer asterisk. Connor's mouth twitched. Jennifer Wu, his medical assistant for the past 2 years, had a gift for efficient communication and an equally impressive gift for reading between the lines. The question mark after wellness consultation, and the very insistent comment translated to, "This guy is pushy and probably trying to sell you something." He typed back, "Tell Ian Martin. I'm fully well, thanks. Mrs. Patterson is fine for Thursday. Mr. Chen's refill approved. Same dosage. See you at the office." 3 seconds later, "Knew you'd say that about Martin? He'll call back. They always do." Connor smiled despite himself. Jennifer was observant in ways that occasionally made him nervous. She asked too many questions, noticed too many details, had a mind that connected dots other people didn't see. It made her an excellent medical assistant. It also made her potentially dangerous to someone with Connor's secrets. Still, he liked her. She had a sharp wit and genuine competence, and she actually cared about the patients instead of just collecting a paycheck. Rare qualities, getting rarer every decade. Connor climbed the 3 porch steps to his front door, automatically cataloguing the morning. Murphy was healthy. Mrs. Chen's blood pressure was controlled. Mr. Peterson needed to change his spark plug. Mrs. Johnson's knees were probably developing osteoarthritis, but weren't bad enough for intervention yet, and some real estate developer named Ian Martin was being annoying. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. Everything was boring. Connor let himself into the house, the familiar emptiness greeting him like an old friend. Hardwood floors he'd refinished himself. Kitchen he never cooked in because cooking for one got depressing after the first century. Living room with tasteful furniture and no personal photos because who could he photograph? His dead family from 1625. He grabbed a protein bar from the cabinet, another part of the performance. Immortal necromancers apparently still needed to eat, though Connor suspected it was more habit than necessity, and headed upstairs to shower. His reflection in the bathroom mirror showed exactly what he designed it to show. A fit man in his early 40s, reasonably attractive, distinguished grey at the temples, hazel eyes with those gold flecks that people sometimes commented on, professional, trustworthy, exactly the kind of doctor you'd want examining your children. Not the kind of creature who could call your soul back from death if you died on his operating table. Connor stepped into the shower and let the hot water run over him, washing away the morning's performance. Under the spray, with no one watching, his expression shifted. The pleasant small-town doctor mask slipped away, revealing something ancient and tired, and profoundly, crushingly bored. He'd been alive for 400 years. He'd seen plague sweep through cities like wildfire, watched armies march across continents, witnessed the birth of nations and the death of empires. He'd loved people who turned to dust. He'd learned languages that died out. He'd mastered skills that became obsolete. And now he was in Millbrook, Vermont, reminding Mrs. Chen to take her blood pressure medication. What am I doing here? The question surfaced like it did most mornings, unbidden and unanswerable. He was surviving. That's what he did. That's what he'd always done. Find a place, establish an identity, blend in, move on, before anyone noticed he never aged. It was safe. It was sustainable. It was slowly crushing his soul into dust. Connor dried off, dressed in his doctor costume, khakis, blue button-down, sensible shoes for house calls, and studied himself in the mirror one more time. The mask was back in place. Dr. Connor McMasters, your friendly neighbourhood physician, ready for another thrilling day of prescription refills and blood pressure checks, his internal monologue sneered. Maybe Mrs. Johnson will need her thyroid tested. Maybe Mr. Peterson will finally change that spark plug. Maybe absolutely nothing interesting will happen. Just like yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. He grabbed his medical bag, actual leather, well-worn, containing everything a good country doctor might need, and headed for his car. The drive to his practice took 12 minutes, through streets he could navigate blindfolded. He'd made this drive 3,847 times in 15 years. Give or take. You're counting your commutes now, his mind whispered in Irish. Tatu agdul, as do me of hair. You're losing your mind. Maybe he was. Maybe this was what immortality meant. Not the grand adventure of history books, but the slow grind of eternal repetition until you couldn't remember why you bothered staying alive. Connor pulled into the parking lot of Millbrook Family Medicine at 7:47 a.m. The sign, his sign, with his name on it, gleamed in the morning sun. The building was a converted Victorian house, painted a professional but welcoming cream with blue trim. Exactly the kind of place that made patients feel comfortable while still respecting the seriousness of medicine. He designed every detail. He hated every brick. Jennifer's car was already in the lot. She always arrived early, a habit Connor appreciated, even if it made him feel vaguely guilty that his 29-year-old assistant outworked him. He grabbed his bag and headed inside, preparing to put on his smile and his voice and his performance of caring. The office smelled like coffee and sanitizer, a combination Connor found oddly comforting. The interior was warm and professional, decorated with just enough personality to seem human. Family medicine certificates from 3 different eras under 3 different names, but no one looked that closely. Landscape photos of Vermont's autumn mountains and covered bridges, a few potted plants on the windowsill that Jennifer watered religiously. Jennifer sat at the front desk, her black hair pulled back in its practical ponytail, wearing scrubs covered in cartoon stethoscopes that should have looked unprofessional, but somehow made patients smile. She glanced up from her computer, holding a phone to her ear with one shoulder, while simultaneously typing something and gesturing at a file folder on her desk. She mouthed, "Prescription refill," and pointed at the folder. Connor picked it up, reviewed the information, nodded his approval. Jennifer gave him a thumbs up and returned to her phone conversation. "Yes, Mrs. Alvarez. Dr. McMasters can see Miguel at 11. Yes, same copay as last time. See you then." She hung up and swiveled in her chair. "Morning, Doc. You look disgustingly energized for someone who runs 5 miles before breakfast. It's not natural." Connor smiled. "Clean living and vegetables, Jennifer. You should try it." "I had a Pop-Tart in the car. Strawberry. Very nutritious." She tapped her keyboard, pulling up the day's schedule. "Mrs. Patterson moved to Thursday, like you said. Mr. Alvarez at 11. Back pain again. Mrs. Rodriguez at 2 for her diabetes check. And that Ian Martin guy called again, twice. He's very eager to meet with you." "About?" "He keeps saying business opportunity and investment in community health, which translates to, I want to sell you something you don't need." Jennifer's expression was skeptical. "He's a real estate agent, Martin Properties. Apparently he's trying to buy half the commercial properties in town." Connor filed this information away under mildly irritating but not urgent. "Tell him I'm not interested if he calls again." "Will do." Jennifer stood, grabbing the coffee pot from the small kitchenette area. "Coffee? Please." She poured him a cup in the mug that said "World's Okayest Doctor," her gift last Christmas, accompanied by the comment, "I didn't want to go with World's Best and give you a big head." Connor appreciated the humour more than she probably knew. It was nice to be treated like a normal person occasionally, instead of the miracle worker patients thought he was. "First patient in 20 minutes, Jennifer said, settling back at her desk. "You want to review files, or do you already have them memorized?" "Memorized," Connor admitted. Jennifer shook her head. "That thing you do, knowing every patient's entire medical history without looking at notes, is super impressive and also vaguely unsettling." "You have no idea," Connor thought. "I remember the medical history of patients from 1756. Yours is nothing." Out loud, he said, "Just good record keeping?" "Uh-huh." Jennifer's expression suggested she didn't entirely believe him, but she let it go. She had a knack for that, pushing just far enough to let Connor know she was paying attention, but not so far it became uncomfortable. Another reason he liked her. Another reason she was potentially dangerous. The morning passed in the comfortable rhythm Connor had perfected over 15 years. Mr. Alvarez came in at 11, complaining of back pain that was entirely real and entirely preventable. He lifted heavy equipment for a living and refused to bend his knees. Connor examined him with the easy confidence of someone who'd been a doctor for longer than modern medicine had existed. "How's work stress been?" he asked, palpating the muscles along Mr. Alvarez's spine. "Construction's always stressful, Doc. We're behind on the new development. Weather's been bad. You know how it is." "And family? Everything good at home?" "Great. Miguel's birthday is coming up. My grandson. He's turning 6. We're doing a superhero theme." Mr. Alvarez's face lit up with the enthusiasm of a man who loved his grandchildren more than life itself. "He wants to be Spider-Man. My daughter's making the cake shaped like a web." "That sounds wonderful." Connor moved to check his range of motion. "How about diet? How much coffee are you drinking these days?" Mr. Alvarez had the grace to look sheepish. "Maybe 6 cups a day. Too much coffee? And water?" "Not enough," Mr. Alvarez admitted. I know. You tell me every time." Connor smiled as he wrote the prescription. He'd memorized every patient's life story, remembered every detail, provided care that felt genuinely personal because he had centuries of practice reading people. Physical therapy twice a week, and I want you drinking at least 6 glasses of water daily. Cut the coffee to 2 cups. "You're the best doctor I've ever had, Doc." Connor looked up from the prescription pad and smiled warmly. "I try." As he handed over the prescription and Mr. Alvarez left, Connor caught Jennifer's eye. She was leaning against the doorframe, and there was a moment where her expression was slightly curious, as if she was trying to figure out something about her boss she couldn't quite articulate. Connor deflected immediately. "What's the afternoon schedule look like?" Jennifer blinked, the moment passing. "Mrs. Rodriguez at 2 for diabetes check. Then you're clear until your house call to Eleanor Henderson." "Perfect." Connor made a show of organising his notes, and Jennifer returned to the front desk. But the seed was planted. Jennifer noticed things. Mrs. Rodriguez's appointment was routine, diabetes management, blood sugar levels looking good, a 1C within target range. She talked about her daughter's upcoming wedding and asked Connor if he was seeing anyone. "Happily single," Connor said automatically, and saw Jennifer smirk from the doorway where she was updating Mrs. Rodriguez's chart. Point taken, Connor thought. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, the afternoon quieted. 3 more patients, all straightforward cases. A child with an ear infection, a teenager needing a sports physical, an elderly man with high cholesterol who needed his medication adjusted. By 4 o'clock, the waiting room was empty. Jennifer was filing paperwork with an efficiency that suggested she could run a hospital single-handedly if someone gave her the chance. "Anything else?" she asked, not looking up from her colour-coded filing system. "I need to make a house call," Connor said. "Eleanor Henderson, weekly check-in." Jennifer nodded. "Give her my best. Tell her I want the recipe for those lemon scones she made last time." "Will do." Connor grabbed his medical bag and headed for the door, pausing when Jennifer called after him. "Doc?" He turned. "Yes." She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "Be careful out there." "It's a house call, Jennifer. Not exactly dangerous." Still, she returned to her filing, but something in her tone made Connor pause. She sounded worried, or maybe just thoughtful. With Jennifer, it was hard to tell. Connor walked to his car, throwing his bag in the back seat and sliding behind the wheel. The drive to Eleanor Henderson's house took 15 minutes through increasingly rural landscape. Millbrook proper gave way to scattered homes on large lots, trees pressing close to narrow roads, the kind of Vermont scenery that made tourists take photos and locals take for granted. Eleanor's Victorian sat at the end of a winding driveway, overlooking a small lake that caught the afternoon sun like hammered silver. It was a beautiful property, easily worth $500,000 if anyone ever convinced Eleanor to sell, which, given her stubborn attachment to the place where she'd lived with her late husband Robert for 43 years, seemed unlikely. Connor had been making this house call every Wednesday afternoon for 3 years, ever since Eleanor's arthritis made office visits difficult. It was one of the few parts of his practice he genuinely enjoyed. Eleanor was sharp, funny, irreverent, and treated Connor with the same no-nonsense affection she'd shown the hundreds of students she'd taught during her 30 years as Millbrook High's principal. He grabbed his bag and walked to the front door, already anticipating the smell of Earl Grey tea and fresh scones. Eleanor baked every Wednesday morning, a ritual she insisted kept her hands nimble despite the arthritis. Connor knocked, and the door swung open almost immediately. "Doctor!" Eleanor Henderson stood in the doorway with a dish towel in her hands and flour dusting her cardigan. At 78, she was still formidable. Silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Sharp blue eyes that had intimidated 3 decades of high school students. Posture that suggested she'd never bowed to anyone in her life. "Right on time. Come in. Come in. Tea's ready." The house smelled like Earl Grey and fresh baked scones, a combination Connor had come to associate with these Wednesday afternoon visits. Eleanor's Victorian was exactly what you'd expect from a retired high school principal. Overstuffed furniture, worn comfortable, bookshelves overflowing with paperbacks and hardcovers, framed photos documenting a life well lived. "Lemon scones today," Eleanor said, leading him to the dining room where tea things were already laid out on the table. "My grandmother's recipe. Jennifer mentioned she wanted to try them." "She'll be jealous I got to them first," Connor said, setting his medical bag on the chair. Eleanor poured tea with steady hands, despite the arthritis that had brought Connor here in the first place. She'd been one of Millbrook High's longest-serving principals, 30 years shaping the town's children into functional adults, and she treated Connor with the same affectionate firmness she'd shown her students. "Before we get to the poking and prodding," Eleanor said, settling into her chair with her teacup, "tell me honestly, how am I doing?" "Your blood pressure has been excellent," Connor said, pulling out his blood pressure cuff. "The new medication is working well. How's the arthritis?" "Manageable. Worse in the mornings, better by afternoon." She extended her arm for the cuff without being asked. "I've been doing those exercises you showed me. They help." Connor wrapped the cuff around her arm and inflated it, watching the gauge. 118/76. Perfect. "Good genes," Eleanor said with satisfaction. "My mother lived to 93, sharp as a tack until the end. I intend to do the same." Connor smiled, checking her medications and making notes. This was one of the few parts of his practice that didn't feel like performance. Eleanor was genuinely good company. Smart, funny, with stories about Millbrook that went back further than most residents' memories. "How's the town treating you, Doctor?" Eleanor asked, taking a scone. "Still settling in after, 15 years?" 15 years, exactly. "And I'm well settled, thank you." "Good. You're a good doctor. We're lucky to have you." She paused, then added with slight irritation, "Unlike some people who've moved to Millbrook recently." Connor's attention sharpened. "Oh?" "Ian Martin, real estate agent." Eleanor's tone suggested she'd tasted something unpleasant. "Calls me practically every day about selling this place. Showed up here twice last week with his papers and his smile and his talk about how much my property has appreciated. As if I care about appreciation. This is my home." Connor filed this information away. Has he been pushy? Pushy doesn't begin to cover it. "Mrs. Henderson, at your age." "Mrs. Henderson, the maintenance must be difficult." "Mrs. Henderson, think of the money." She shook her head. "Money. As if that's all that matters. Robert and I bought this house 43 years ago. We built our life together here. He's buried in the cemetery up the hill. Where exactly does Mr. Martin think I should go? There was fierce loyalty in her voice, and something else, the kind of attachment that went bone deep. Connor recognised it. He'd seen it in people across centuries, the ones who belonged to places the way trees belong to soil. You're under no obligation to sell, Connor said gently. I know that. Mr. Martin seems to have trouble understanding it. Eleanor took a sip of tea. He offered me what he called silly money, 1.2 million. Can you imagine? For this old house? Connor could imagine. Lakefront property in Vermont, Victorian architecture, perfect condition. Ian Martin was probably planning to flip it for double that. Just ignore him, Connor advised. He'll eventually move on to easier targets. I suppose. Eleanor didn't sound convinced. There's something about him that bothers me, Doctor. He smiles too much, and his eyes don't match his smile. Connor knew that feeling. He'd met men like that many times over the decades, the ones who saw people as obstacles or opportunities rather than humans. Usually, they were harmless, just aggressively unpleasant. Occasionally, they were dangerous. If he makes you uncomfortable, you can always call the police, Connor said. Oh, I'm not afraid of him. Eleanor's tone suggested the idea was ridiculous. I dealt with teenage boys hopped up on hormones and entitlement for 30 years. Ian Martin is just a mosquito. Annoying, but harmless. Connor smiled and finished his examination, checking her reflexes, listening to her heart, asking about her diet and sleep. Everything was good. Eleanor Henderson was healthy for 78, active, clear-minded, likely to hit her mother's 93 with room to spare. As he packed up his medical bag, Eleanor refilled his teacup. Now, Doctor, I want to ask you something medical. Of course. My friend Margaret keeps telling me I should get one of those walk-in bathtubs, says it would help with my arthritis, that the warm water would be therapeutic. Eleanor's expression turned firm. I told her absolutely not, but she keeps bringing it up. What's your professional opinion? Connor considered. Warm water can be therapeutic for arthritis, but if you're not comfortable with it, it's not about comfort. It's about... Eleanor paused, and for the first time since Connor had known her, she looked uncertain. When I was 7 years old, I nearly drowned in a bathtub. I was playing, slipped under the water, couldn't get my head back up. My mother pulled me out, but I remember the panic, the water in my lungs, the certainty I was going to die. Connor set down his teacup. That must have been terrifying. It was 66 years ago, but I can still feel it sometimes, that sensation of water closing over my head. I've never taken a bath since, only showers. I know it's probably irrational. It's not irrational, Connor said firmly. It's a completely understandable response to trauma. Eleanor looked relieved. Margaret thinks I'm being silly, but I can't even look at a full bathtub without feeling that panic all over again. Then don't, Connor said simply. There are other ways to manage arthritis. You don't need to force yourself into a situation that causes you distress. Thank you, Doctor. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Eleanor straightened, her usual confidence returning. I take showers exclusively, Doctor. Have for 60 years. And I'll continue to do so. Connor made a note in his records. Patient has severe bathophobia secondary to childhood near drowning at age 7. Witnessed own near-death experience in bathtub. Adamant about avoiding bathtubs. Respect this boundary in all treatment recommendations. Asterisk. He didn't know why he was so thorough with the note. Just instinct, perhaps. The kind of detail that might matter someday. Well, Eleanor said, standing and walking Connor to the door. Same time next week? Same time next week, Connor confirmed. Eleanor handed him a paper bag. Scones for Jennifer. Tell her the secret is lemon zest and a pinch of cardamom. She'll be thrilled. Connor walked to his car, turning back once to wave. Eleanor stood on her porch, dish towel still in hand, looking every inch the formidable woman who'd shaped half of Millbrook's current adult population. Don't work too hard, she called. Connor waved back, smiling genuinely for the first time all day. He liked Eleanor Henderson. She reminded him of someone from centuries ago, a woman in Cork who'd refused to bow to English soldiers even when they'd burned her house down. Fierce, loyal, unbreakable. As he drove away, Connor thought about Ian Martin and his pushy sales tactics. Probably nothing to worry about. Eleanor could handle herself. Still, He made a mental note to keep an eye on the situation, just in case. All Connor knew, driving back toward town with a bag of lemon scones on the passenger seat, was that Eleanor Henderson was doing well, Ian Martin was annoying, and his life continued in its predictable, mundane rhythm. He craved something, anything, to break the monotony. Be careful what you wish for. Connor turned on the radio and drove home, completely unaware that his wish was about to be granted in the most terrible way.